And this guy said to me, and this is a guy I know who's a pastor, he says, why is it always about what Jesus said and did? And I very nearly shat myself.
Western Christianity has spent the last 2,000 years telling everyone they're separated from God.
This is Not Church with John and Nat Turney.
Everybody, welcome back to the podcast. My name is Nat Turney. I'm here with my brother, as always, John. Say hi, John.
Hi, John.
Well done. See, at least I can count on one thing in life, right? I mean, everything else is transitory, but no, John will dutifully respond. Hi, John. And I appreciate that about him.
I take my role as the straight man very, very serious.
Yes, and you do it well, to perfection, I would say.
Yeah.
So we're here with another episode of This Is Not Church. We have an awesome guest with us today. I'm just going to take a minute and introduce him to you and let him talk a little bit about himself, and then we're going to jump straight into wherever this conversation takes us. And if you've been a listener of the podcast for any length of time, you know it could go anywhere, man. We just don't have any control, man. So here we go. This gentleman's name is Albert Tate. He is the founding and lead pastor of Fellowship Church in Los Angeles County, California. He began his ministry pastoring just a few families at Sunset Home Church in Mississippi before serving the historic Lake Avenue Church in Pasadena, California. Hearing the call from God to plant a church, Albert and his wife, LaRosa, launched a Fellowship Church in January 2012. In its short history, this gospel-centered, multiethnic, intergenerational church has already established a solid foothold in the region to the glory and honor and transformational power of Christ. As a dynamic communicator, Albert is passionate about sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ both locally and globally. He serves on the Board of Trustees at Azusa Pacific University, the Global Pacific Network, and global church planting organization Stadia. Albert is the founder and CEO of The Greatest Story, Inc. and president of Harambee, am I saying that right? Ministries. Yep. He recently published his first book entitled How We Love Matters, a call to practical, relentless racial reconciliation. Albert is the proud father of 4 children, Zoe, Bethany, Isaac, and Micah. If I messed any of that up, I apologize ahead of time, but I think I got 98% of it right. What do you say?
96%. You're
all right. Did I mispronounce your daughter's name? Is it Zoe?
No, it's Zoe. You got it.
Okay. It's always, it's a coin flip with that one. You never know.
It is, but I'm so glad to be here, guys. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, we're glad to have you. We appreciate any opportunity to talk to somebody that we don't know or with whom we're not super familiar. So that's great for us. So if you wouldn't mind, like as John explained offline, our typical sort of opening question for folks is just ask them to tell us a little bit about their faith journey, kind of where they started, how they wound up where they are today, saying what they're saying today.
Yeah. Well, like I said, it's an honor and privilege to be here. I feel bad. I don't know if your listeners can see any pictures or y'all should post some pictures. This is the most bearded podcast I've ever, like the beard wrong here. And it threw me off.
I think we should actually retitle it. What do you think, John? We'll rename. We'll get away from the This Is Not Church and just go like the Bearded Brothers podcast.
Hey, I'm telling you, your audience may grow exponentially. That and the name.
That's good.
The name too kind of threw me off because Nat Turney is really close to Nat Turner.
Right.
Which is a whole nother historical figure. So I was getting ready to go there, but I was like, oh no, it's Nat Turney. Okay, all right, okay.
Yeah, I think at least once or twice in my life, my mom tried to convince me that she named me for Nat Turner. It's not true.
I can't imagine that being true. But hey, it's a great.
I did want to claim it. So,
there you go. So I was born and raised down in Mississippi. Both of my grandfathers pastored churches for over 40 years. My mother was a piano player there at my local rural town, Black Holiness Church. And I grew up in a Christian home, Christian family. At Christmas events and at different dinners, we'd all go down. My mom would play the piano and we'd sing hymns. And my grandmother would just cry in the corner with her little tape recorder. So at our home, there's a big box of tape recorders from my grandmother just recording us singing around the house. She's gone on to be with the Lord now, and so both my grandfathers. But that's kind of the culture and kind of how I grew up. I accepted Jesus at 17, and then I started this journey. I flunked out of high school. That's a part of my kind of salvation story. I had to get my GED, went to like this junior college. Then the Lord called me to ministry, and I went to a Bible college. And it was a predominantly white Bible college. I talk about this a little bit in the book. It was one of the only pieces of chocolate in the classroom in the whole school, actually. There was a few of us. And that's when I begin to see how even in the church, as I look at scripture, the church doesn't look like its picture. Because our picture is, man, this beautiful mosaic of all of God's creation, every tongue, nation, tribe, and race. And John in Revelation takes the time to even paint that picture with detail. So it's not even like, oh, all of that will wash away. It's like, nah, we're going to see tribes, we're going to hear tongues, we're going to see races. As a matter of fact, sometimes I think about it, I was like, man, what language we going to talk in heaven? You know what I mean? Because we just think we're going to be talking English. Do you know how many other languages there are? I was like,
there's at least 4.
I know, right? I was like, how are we going to figure that out? And then I was like, the Holy Spirit may say, everybody just going to speak in tongues. And the Pentecostals are going to be like, we told y'all. I tell you. So I finished Bible college. I started pastoring this small local church while I was in Bible college. It's called Sweet Home Church in Pelahatchie, Mississippi. I had about 7 people. Over 5 years, I grew it to about 14 people.
So you doubled in size.
Outreach Magazine never called me for that, though. They never put me in the top fastest growing churches. We literally doubled in size. I don't know a lot of churches that can say that. So I've
gone the other way. But
yeah. After that season, though, I moved to California to go to school at Fuller Seminary and to work at Lake Avenue Church. And that's when the Lord just began to put me, that was my first time working at a majority, predominantly white conservative church. And I just began to learn a lot and begin to see a lot. And mostly a burden was just birthed to build churches that look like our picture. And that's kind of been my journey. We planted Fellowship after being at Lake Avenue for about 5 or 6 years. We planted Fellowship Church, where I lead now. We just celebrated 10 years, and it's a multi-ethnic, gospel-centered, intergenerational church that's all about disciple making.
Awesome. Well, that begs the question. Let's just jump right in, I guess, because John said something before we hit the record button that I didn't want to forget. And so let's just jump right into this discussion of racism in the church. It's been my experience that almost everything that you see outside the church happens inside the church. We just don't like to talk about it. And we do love I think we like to think that we don't do it as badly as others. So think about, sexual abuse, think about, any divorce and infidelity. And now we can throw in racism as well. And that was sort of John's jumping off point. Was like, that's just so surprising that's so prevalent inside the church. What's your take on that? I mean, I'm not even sure how to frame that question, but
I think it's important that we understand what the church is, even to begin with.
Yeah, for sure.
The moment we show up at a church service with our humanity, the whole place is broken. Like the moment we show up. So church, man, our PR team has got to get the right messaging, because we put it out there that we are these perfect people that are judging other people, that are better than other people. And we are absolutely not. We are broken, toe up from the flow up, a hot mess group of folks that have found hope, that have found community, that have found a way forward. And that's through the blood and the power of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So we are there desperately seeking wholeness, just like the rest of the world. So of course, we bring all of that brokenness that's in the culture. That culture comes to church. And the hope is that the grace of God, the redemptive story of God, and the power of healing that can happen in community will help us be better broken people. But at best, we're just better broken people. Better, not compared to other people, but better than how I was last week. My hope is that the Holy Spirit is working in me and I'm better this week than I was last week. Even if I'm not, His grace is sufficient. That's what church is, man. It's for broken people. So, of course, racism is in the church. Of course, sexual abuse is in the church. Of course, that stuff is there. How do we deal with it? How do we care for one another? How do we grow one another? How do we hold each other accountable for those things? Because healing can't begin unless confession initiates it. So many people go through so much energy trying to defend whether or not they're racist or not. And I come out the gate saying, I know I am. I know I didn't grow up with people. I didn't grow up with Chinese people. I didn't grow up with Asian people. So of my level of ignorance to the Asian culture is through the freaking roof. My level of ignorance concerning Latino brothers and sisters is through the roof. Now, I've spent years now in relationship and building those relationships. But when I first started, oh my goodness, Mr. Miyagi was all I knew. That was the only Asian reference I had. So, of course, I came in with bias, with prejudice, with racism. Oh, I was a hot mess. But that's where the beauty of Christ comes in and says, the family of faith says, okay, come here with your ignorant self. Let me help learn you, as we would say back in Mississippi. Let me help learn you. And let me sit and listen and learn other cultures, learn other perspectives. And you learn to respect it. And you learn to see more of God when we intentionally go there. But guys, we never get there if we spend all that time trying to act like we're not something that, of course, we are. Of course.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things that's most disappointing for me, and as John explained, he's outside the church completely. I'm hanging on by a thread, if I'm being real honest with you, because I get really, really disappointed very often. And maybe that's my expectation levels are too high at some point. But when things happen and the institutional church's first knee-jerk response is to close ranks, to cover up, we're all love to point fingers at the Catholic Church because they're going through this right now with all the ways in which they have covered up for sexual abusers and other people. And I'm not trying to draw a parallel, by the way, between those two things. It's just that's one area, but that seems to be our first response. So when it seems like our racist tendencies are being uncovered, there's a lot of defensiveness there, especially on the part of folks that look like me, especially in my age group. So middle-aged, white, cisgender dudes like me, we get real defensive because, well, maybe I've never personally done anything to anybody. And so therefore I can't be a participant in this except I'm a beneficiary of, hundreds of years of institutional and systemic racial bias. So we have to own that, right? For better, for worse, we have to at least acknowledge that it exists.
Absolutely. What amazes me, bro, is how we give Satan a pass when it comes to this sin. But all other sins, we're ready for it. Brothers, anybody committed biblical adultery? We'd be like, oh, pray for me, brother. My eyes. I got it. My mind. Oh, pray for me. Anybody lied in the last couple of weeks? Anybody show up with inauthenticity in any of your relationships? Yeah, when my uncle asked to borrow money, I told him I didn't have it. I lied. I did have it. I just don't trust you, Uncle Ray, because last time I borrowed money, you didn't pay me back. So we can see sin in those areas. So we'll confess, y'all, to adultery. We'll confess to lying. What about racism? No, never. I've never done. Never. As if Satan gonna get to racism and say, "Oh no, let's not put that sin on him. Let's not do that." Of course he tempts us. Of course that. But here's the deal: it's hard to get us to repent of something that we refuse to acknowledge is real. So it's hard to invite the Holy Spirit to work in an area in your life if we're not willing to admit that it actually is in our life. And I just think this is where we need the Bible. This is where we need to get Fox News, MSNBC, and CNN out of our discipleship. And we need to come back to the Bible and recognize that, of course, this is a sin that humanity struggles with, and it's systematized and it's perpetual. And we need to identify it so the Lord can bring healing and we can begin to do the work. But we ain't gonna never do the work if the enemy can convince us that it's not even real.
Well, I mean, and then, when the word racism is thrown at a church and saying, that this church has racist tendencies or whatever, they are so quick to say, well, no, because we can't be racist because, brother so-and-so goes to our church and we allow him to hand out the handouts. So he is front and center handing out handouts to every single one of the other parishioners who every other single one of them happen to be white. So how can we be racist? Because you're racist and you have racist tendencies because there's no one in leadership in your church of any ethnicity other than white. You're not giving anybody any, I don't want to say power, but you're not giving anyone a place of authority or anything like that. But you're going to say that you have the one black guy in your church, so you're multi-ethnical or that's the wrong word.
Multi-ethnical.
Yeah.
Well, and which he made up a word, but it is about they have multi levels of ethics. They don't have one ethic.
Right. Multi-ethical, I like.
Yeah. That's what he said. He said multi-ethical. We're going to give him that word.
Yes. I like that.
They are inconsistent.
And if that's not the word, it should be.
It should be. They are multi-ethical. They don't have a solid ethic. They have multiple ethics.
But it's all one system of ethics for everybody else, right? And then for themselves, they don't hold themselves to that same standard. But
again, I mean, isn't it? It's just another place where like the church is saying that they are better at, higher than because they're not part of the world, right? They're separated from the world. But then once again, here we see this, right? Every white guy of my age and Nat's age who is called out as racist, the first thing we're going to say is, "I have a black friend." Yeah. Right. Yeah. As if that gives me a pass.
Well, that's the white racist playbook.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
They give you some lines to say of how to come back, and that's the first line in the playbook. I have a black friend. Remember Jeffrey from the 6th grade?
Yeah,
we basketball together.
Man, we shared a sandwich once.
Yeah, and I didn't even see his color, which is
the
the second line in the playbook.
Yeah, the second one is I don't even see color. Right?
I didn't even notice he was a black guy. Until my mom said he couldn't come to my house, but then I thought that was because he was sick that day. It's like,
I do think the only place I've ever seen genuine color blindness, if that's a thing, is in children. You ever notice that? I mean, and I'm not saying that they don't notice the difference. I just don't think they have the vocabulary for it.
They just don't care.
So you see a 2-year-old run to another 2-year-old and embrace and hug and go off and play. Yeah, I just don't even think they have anything to sort that into a category. They just saw another kid that was their age and they lock eyes and
I think they see color differences. They just haven't been taught yet to hate them.
Right.
So
or to normalize one, right?
Yeah,
that's one of the conversations we keep having with folks about race is this more subtle. It's obviously we know you put a white robe on and a hood, and I know who you are. On some levels, I actually kind of appreciate that. At least you're honest. But there's this more subtle form of racism that's not about overt hatred, but it's more about normalizing whiteness over everything else. And now that's the standard to which we compare everything. Somehow, my folks with my melanin or my pigment, we've somehow become the standard.
Yeah.
But you can do that, and on some level, feel good about yourself still, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
I don't feel better than you. I just feel normal and you're something else compared to me, right?
Yeah. And that's why I think it's important, even with you guys, John, I don't consider you outside of the church. I think sounds like you're more in the church than ever before. You've just opted out of the white system.
Amen.
Which I would encourage, because it could be devastating. That's what I came out of Bible college saying. I'm not adopting this system. And what we have to do is not then allow white privilege to inadvertently shape us to think that they get to even normalize what church is. So now when I think of the definition of church, I am thinking about the poor white conservative examples that I've seen. And now that definition is going to create an issue within me. Well, now I'm bowing down to white privilege because I'm letting them define the church as whiteness, as normative, when the church is so much bigger than that. Multi-ethnic church, black churches, Asian churches, Latino churches, churches in Egypt, churches in Israel, churches in India, churches in China, in the underground church. Man, God's doing so much. House churches, community churches. I know a church is meeting in the bar. Beer, bourbon, and the Bible. And
I know that.
Working that thing out. You got John. It's got your name. You could be a deacon at that church. And I would love to associate pastor. So even with that language, when people say they walked away from the church, let's just go on and be all the way honest. You've walked away from a white system of church, and we need to explore new opportunities because the abundance of God is there in a whole to hopefully bring some redemption to our white brothers and sisters and those churches, to invite them to the bigger table that God has set. And it's a kingdom table that's bloodstained at the center of it. So it's decentralizing whiteness. So we got to even do that, because a lot of people, some black kids saying, man, the church is this, the church is that. I said, what church are you talking about? the church is racist. The church is no. You're talking about white people who center whiteness in the name of the church. That's not the church. So even that distinction is so helpful because we'll let white privilege rob us of our kingdom birthright to be a part of the family of faith because they've hijacked church in centralized whiteness.
Well, and as this becomes more global, right? So this, the idea of faith and Christianity becomes more of a global phenomenon as opposed to this centralized Western version of church. I think it scares the crap out of them, out of the white evangelical church, because they are finding out very, very quickly, we aren't the majority when you look at it worldwide. If we can hunker down in our own little country, we're still the majority. White churches are the majority. But if you look at it as a worldwide phenomenon, which it is, the white church is very much the minority within the faith.
Oh, absolutely. And I think there's stats coming out now, even in America. If it hasn't shifted to the minority yet, in another 10 or 20 years, the white church will be the minority in America. Right.
Well, and then, it's amusing. Somebody put a meme on Facebook the other day, and I wish I could remember it word for word, but it essentially was, as white folks are wrestling with the idea of no longer being the majority and they're starting to freak out. It's like, why would you do that? Are minorities somehow treated differently in this country?
Oh,
right.
It's like, so you actually acknowledge in your fear that there is something to fear. Okay, yeah. Well, that's actually a good starting point, isn't it? Yeah. So there's inequity here. You know that people aren't treated the same, and you just don't want to be. You're fine as long as you're not them.
And that here's the deepest fear is that if we become the majority, that we will treat you like you treated us, the minority.
Well, yeah, but then again, you have to acknowledge that there's been unfair treatment.
There has, which is there, yeah, it's totally baked into the premise. Well, I think several people have said even poor white people wouldn't trade places with a rich black person. It's no, we're all equal, right? Yeah, would you want to be black? Never. Like no, even we go back. I don't want to be black, man. I don't want to be no Mexican here. So everybody knows the truth. You know what I mean? Let's be honest. But there's a new day coming, bro.
Well, I just want to be on the record here saying that I would 100% trade places with a rich black folks. I've been rich and I've been poor, and rich is better. So I got no issue, man. But John and I went to a thing. One of the things that I think actually John and I, we live a couple thousand miles apart. We're brothers, and we've spent most of our lives together. But we hadn't really talked about any of this very much, and that's part of our privilege is we can or we can't. We don't have to. But we were at, I dragged him to a church planting conference in Las Vegas of all places. And so John and I are there with my senior pastor and his wife. And we went to this largely, I would say, what do you think? 95% or so white.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, but into a large mega church in Las Vegas, had this conference, a couple thousand people there, all hopped up about planting churches. And I think it was the first speaker, John, was a guy named Miles McPherson. And so Miles gets up, and I don't know him from Adam. He was the only interesting speaker the entire weekend. He was the only guy that had anything challenging to say. And he immediately said, church, let's talk about this. Let's talk about white privilege. And you could have heard a pin drop in that place.
Wow.
It had been rocking and rolling 10 minutes before as the band played and did all their things. And now we'll say this, they seem to listen. But I got from him one of the best definitions, because let's talk about this for a second, if you don't mind. Because the second that you talk to somebody, especially someone who looks like me, and you mention white privilege, immediately the response I get is, man, you don't know my life. My life's been hard. Things haven't been just handed to me, and so there's this misnomer that white privilege means you didn't have to struggle. When Miles, and I'm sure you may agree or not, but Miles's perception was, no, that's not the issue at all. It was that your struggles and mine weren't the same. You didn't, of all the things you had to contend with, you didn't also have to contend with this. And I'm like, okay, that makes a lot of sense, because that takes the onus off of me to somehow prove that my life has also been difficult.
Yeah. I think a part of the line is Miles is phenomenal. He's out here in Southern California where I am. Your life could have been hard, but it was never the color of your skin that made it hard.
Right. Exactly.
Right. Well, I mean, So like one of the things he says is that he uses is like, so me as a middle-aged white man, I go into a realtor because I want to buy a house. I don't have to worry about them kind of quietly or not so subtly, maybe even nudging me towards a certain area to look at houses and nudge me away from a certain area. It's like, yeah, you don't really want to look at houses in this area. That's not part of my struggle. I'm not going to be pushed into an area to look at houses because of the color of my skin. You know, when I get, I'll go ahead and mention this now because it was another eye-opener for me within white privilege. I believe it was in the forward of your book where you talk about during the pandemic, you and your family needed to just get out and go somewhere. And you guys ended up in a rest area to just kind of get out into the trees, get out into into nature away from like the big city area. And I don't remember which one, but one of your kids ends up going back to the car because there's a police officer in the parking lot and they feel uncomfortable. So they go and sit in the car. Here's where my white privilege comes in. If I'm in a rest area and I see a police officer, I instantly feel more comfortable. I feel better being there, specifically if it's at night, right? If it's at night and I have to pull into a rest area, say I'm on my way home and I pull into a rest area and I see a police officer there, I instantly feel safer, better. And it was like a weird thing. I'm like, oh crap. I never thought of that. Like if I was to roll into a person of color is to roll into a rest stop at night and see a cop, they'd probably just roll on by. They'll just leave, get back on the highway and hope they can find another one. And even if they have to go to the bathroom really, really bad, right? They're like, yeah, I'm out.
Yo, I'm 44 years old. I pastor a multi-ethnic church. 40 to 50% of my church is white people. And at 44 years old, bro, when I see a police officer, just innately, I have anxiety. Now, that doesn't mean that they're going to do anything. Doesn't mean that they're bad, but it means I've got enough narratives passed on from my grandfather to my father to my own upbringing, my own experience. I was just in Jacksonville, Florida, right before the pandemic hit, preaching. I landed late that night and I was staying like at a little condo beach thing. The lady at the church, they own some condos and they put the preacher up on the beach so we can kind of hang out and do our thing. But when you go to these beach houses, they're usually off the beaten path a little bit because you got to get there by the water. So you're going through like the woods and stuff. And then all of a sudden, you're this big thing. I land late. It's about 10 because I'm coming from California. It's about the time I fly to Florida. It's about 10, 11 o'clock. I'm trying to find this beach house. It's off this little road. So I'm driving slow, speeding up a little bit, driving slow, trying to find my turn. Cops pull me over. True story, no embellishment. As the young people say, no cap. I immediately go to my roll. I know I got to get my wallet out early because if I wait till he gets here to get it out, then I'm going to have to move and that's not going to be good look. So by the time he gets to the window and asks me to roll my window down, my hands are already very visible. I'm already there. I don't see him walk up. He's already walked up. And he says, "You're not going to let the window down?" Just like that. And he startled me. And I look and I turn around. He has a gun pointed to my head outside my car window. So he's standing with the gun pointed full-fledged with a flashlight. And I let the window down. He has a conversation with me with a gun to me the whole time. And, and here's the little stuff, but as a black man, I'm like, yo, I'm worthy of respect. Respect. He was like a smart aleck. I would say the other word, but I don't know if y'all got a profanity.
You can call him a smart ass if you want to.
Oh, he was a smart ass. So he's kind of going on. And so a part of that is like, he's just chipping away, just being disrespectful to me. So I'm not worthy of respect. So as a black man, what I'm having to do, guys, I'm having to swallow my ability to defend myself. So to stand up for myself in that moment, I gotta take all of that down because I'd rather go home disrespected than not come home at all.
Right. Yeah.
And he didn't give me a ticket. He was just a jerk. He had a gun to me the whole time, gave me my license back and told me to told me to go on about my way. Bro, nothing about me was comforted by that. And I was angry for a little while. To be honest, it built onto an anger that's at a low brew in me, and anxiety when it comes to engagement in police officers. Now, we got great police officers at our church. I know all police officers aren't bad. I know all of that. We got family members that are part of the police force. I know all of that. I've gone to events for the police force. So it's not like this blanket thing, but there is a dynamic that's real in the lives of Black men that we can't just sweep under the cover and just act like that's not real. We got to talk about that. And it's important for my white brothers to know that that's my burden, and to see my burden and not be my burden in that moment. Not have to make me defend my story because it's not real for you does not mean that it's not real for me.
Well, here, let's compare here. I've had a gun pulled on me by a cop once in my life. And tell me what would have happened if you did what I did. So I was 17 years old. I got pulled over I had this old truck. And for some reason, I decided to take a bunch of my friends. I had the back of my truck full of kids. I had 5 people in the cab of my truck, which is only supposed to hold 3. I forgot to turn my lights on. I sped through a yellow light turning red. I got pulled over. I looked down and I realized I wasn't wearing my seatbelt. So my first thought was, I need to get out of the car so he doesn't see that I don't have my seatbelt. So I got out of my car.
Wow.
I got out of my car and started walking towards the officer. And he, rightly so, at that point, I guess, I mean, I shouldn't say rightly so, I don't know. But he got behind his car and pulled his gun on me.
Wow.
If a Black 17-year-old had done what I did, he wouldn't be here talking about it.
Oh, man.
There's no way. There's no way in hell.
No way.
We would be mourning the loss of another 17-year-old person.
Yeah.
Another 17-year-old Black boy.
Yeah.
In this country.
Yeah.
But that again, there's white privilege. I didn't even think that this was a bad idea.
Yeah.
That's also 17-year-old stupidity.
Right. Yeah.
Didn't think that was a bad idea.
But they're expecting people, 17-year-old BIPOC people to be more adult, to be more grown up, to not make these stupid little mistakes that you would make as a 17-year-old.
We don't get that same assumption of stupidity.
Exactly.
We all have.
You just get the assumption of hostility.
Yes.
Right? So a 17-year-old Black kid walking towards you is now aggressive, not dumb.
Yes.
Right?
Right.
When people like John and I talk about having to talk with our kids, we're having to talk about birds and the bees and safe sex and stuff. All of my Black friends, when they have to talk with their kids, it's how to interact safely with police.
Yeah.
It's how to not get dead if you get pulled over for something dumb. And it's exactly what you just described. Make sure your hands are visible. Make sure you're compliant. Make sure you're polite. And I've seen folks, just go on YouTube and watch videos. They're actually kind of funny, but there's folks who have taken it upon themselves to kind of instigate interactions with police in order to bring to light some of the ways in which they abuse our constitutional rights. I've never seen a person of color do this.
No, because we wouldn't.
I don't think you'd survive it.
Here's another conversation that I have with my kids now, because they're growing up pretty multiculturally through church, through friendships and stuff like that. And I still tell my kids today, hey, what your friends do, you can't necessarily do. And it's because you're Black. And I tell my sons, I got to tell my sons, when he's hanging out with his white friends that are female and other females in a mixed company and stuff, you can't play the same jokes as they play. And some people may hear that and think, oh, Albert, that's just not real. No, because whenever the cops come, according to their training, their cultural competency, and their experience, they will see my son as a threat and see the other white kids as someone who's very familiar to them, as a niece or a nephew, or that's like my neighbor. But that Black kid, I got suspicion on him. So I even train my kids today. There's still a uniqueness about you that you need to guard and steward.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but I do see, hopefully anyway, I do see a lot more, or I should say, I hear a lot more conversation about this.
Absolutely. I mean, what God's doing in the church and in certain buckets and in different kinds of churches. So there are different kinds of churches other than white evangelical conservative churches where this fight is taking place. There's some places where this ain't even a fight. They are actively pursuing it. They're experiencing it. They're celebrating the wins and the joys of it. So there are places in the body of Christ where this is being celebrated, illuminated, and elevated in some significant, substantial ways. So I am so encouraged at this next generation, their voice and their refusal to be silent on justice issues.
No, good for them. I mean, it's funny because I talk to my kids, and my kids are all in their 20s now, and there are things that we talk about that they're like they're shocked that it's an issue.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so that's, if I'm optimistic at all, it's because I think their kids and their kids will even be hopefully be further removed from that as well. But I see the church, sadly, I do. And I know I'm using this church in a very blanket and generalizing way. I don't mean it to be that way necessarily, but historically we've been very slow on stuff like this. And that's one of the things that I feel like we'll look, all these missed opportunities for the church to lead. And you see this time and time again. You see in the 30s and the 40s in Germany, why was it not the church who was, there was a small fragment of the confessing church that outright opposed the Third Reich. You go, fast forward to the 60s in America and the Civil Rights Movement, and there were, why weren't all churches on the forefront of this?
Yeah, the black church was on the forefront.
Yeah,
the conservative white church was
man.
not.
We fought that thing tooth and nail, you know. Yeah. And it breaks my heart because it should be our birthright. Should be all of this, right? To be a follower of Christ is to be one of a tribe of multi-ethnic. We're just not supposed to categorize ourselves that way.
Yeah,
but, it does. So I'm simultaneously sad and optimistic somewhat. I try to hold on and not become a cynic, Yeah.
No, that sounds like the tension that God has called us to live in.
Yeah.
And see Him face to face. Yeah. We are in a perpetual state of sadness and hopefulness because of the reality of humanity in our world. Yeah.
And unfortunately, the white evangelical church is just really, really loud.
That's true.
So loud that there's this perception within this country specifically that they are the majority. And I'm beginning to wonder if within their beliefs and their system and their system of racism, I just think they're just louder, and they have hijacked not only the word Christian from all these other, churches that are doing some really good work. They've created this unholy matrimony with the conservative political party. And they have made a horrendous, I don't even know what to call it. Well, I mean, it ends up where we have a former president who is willing and able to say whatever the hell he wants, and not only isn't kicked out of office for it, but is cheered and praised for it as being, well, he's saying what this country needs to get us back on track to be the America we used to be. It's like, really? The America we used to be.
Well, and the thing about that is, it's not that America's saying it, but Christians are his biggest amen corner.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
For white evangelical Christian.
Yeah.
Because there's a whole other church out there, and I don't think it's as loud in certain spaces, but it's powerful and it's real, and that's what the future is. The future is going to be found in places where we can come together, where people that don't look alike, don't live alike, don't vote alike are coming together for something that's greater. And that's the real power of the gospel of Jesus Christ. So I don't want people to become so jaded by our white evangelical brothers and sisters who are still working this out. There are some other places in the kingdom, bro, where this thing is worked out. And we ain't waiting around trying to get a vote of approval from nobody. We're doing
good.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. And as well you should. So let's talk about your book then, because that's ostensibly why we're here. We definitely want to hear about the content of the book. So what does it mean to practice? I'll just steal the title of your book, Relentless Racial Reconciliation. So what does that look like for us, for the church?
Yeah, I think a big deal is, before we get to the application of racial reconciliation, we've got to sit in the revelation of what in fact love really is.
Okay.
Because in order for us to love one another well, we got to know what love is. And in order for us to come together over our differences, oh man, love has got to shape that whole narrative. So we sit a lot in the love chapter of 1 Corinthians, The book closes with just what love is and what love looks like. Love is patient. Love is kind. Y'all know the love chapter. Most often read at weddings, most seldom seen in marriages. Most often preached about in churches, most seldom lived out in Christians. So a part of it is coming back to love and just saying, yo, this is what you think about guns. You think these shootings are about mental illness. Somebody else thinks they're about guns and gun laws and that kind of stuff. How we have that conversation, how we process that out is shaped by how we love one another. Our ability to love one another well through that conversation shapes the whole conversation. You think CRT is a whole thing? I think it's a huge distraction from a real thing. I don't get to be a jerk just because I disagree with you. I don't get to dismiss you. And God calls us to enemy love. He calls us to a love of people that have different perspectives than we do. And how do we practice that? Because if we begin to practice love, then we'll see the fruit of that application of racial reconciliation. We've got to see it as spiritual formation. It's got to be a part of our discipleship. Racism has been discipled in, and y'all, we got to disciple that thing out. And it's got to start with this high ethic of love and our ability to love people that offend us. So we get offended around here, bro. We think getting offended is the worst thing I'm offended. I'm leaving. I'm out. Being offended is the worst thing that can happen to you. According to 1 Corinthians, not loving well those who offended you could be the worst thing that can happen. Yeah,
well, that's something. But that takes a recognition, doesn't it? I mean,
absolutely.
I mean, one of the things that has bothered me so much, and it's nothing new, but it just seems like in this age of social media and all of this stuff, but it seems like our ability to disagree with each other respectfully is gone.
Yes.
Especially with the sort of level of anonymity that comes with being a keyboard warrior. So I found this out. Honestly, it's why I've stopped posting so much I don't post nearly as much on Twitter or Facebook anymore because I just don't need the bullshit. I don't need to sit there and be attacked for having a different opinion. But you can see, the point I was trying to make was draw a parallel because you talk about loving well. I get attacked the worst. I have the most vitriol aimed at me from Christians.
Absolutely. It's like, who are you people? What?
Yeah. It never starts off with, man, okay, I don't agree with you, but I can see how you got there. Let's talk about this. It's usually heretic, apostate, whatever, or worse, or they'll just cuss me out in the name of Jesus, which is fun. So
we think that love, we get to define it. And our politicians, I think you referred to one earlier, John, they've just modeled for us that you can just be a jerk to people that disagree with you. You can be a jerk. You can go off on them. And your Christian ethic, that doesn't impede your Christianity at all. That is fully great. If it's truth, if it's right, if you feel like it's the real thing, then you can just be a jerk. Like you can just say what you want to say. That's just not what love is. That's just not what love is. And we've got to come back to what love is. And, I had to pray because, bro, people be talking in the comments and I'd be like, I wish you would say that in my face. Would you say that to my face? If you wouldn't say it to my face, don't come in my comments saying that because let me tell you something. You talking brand new up in here. I was starting to get in my OG spirit. I had to come out. I wasn't on love. I was like, you got one more time to talk crazy to me in these comments. I know where you live, boo-boo. The Holy Spirit's still working on me. He's working on me. Teaching me how to love. How we love matters.
That's right. How we love, well, yeah.
Well, I was just saying that's funny because I speak from this place of love and loving people, and it matters. And then someone will say something to me, and I'm like, man, you say that one more time, I'm going to throat punch you.
Yes, yeah.
And they're like, oh, well, I thought you're about love. I was like, yeah, but I can still get angry.
Yeah,
I can still get angry at stupid.
Yeah. I was all about love till you said that dumb stuff. Mm-hmm. But that's why we're all on a journey. That's why we need the Holy Spirit. That's why we're not going to be perfect at it. But that's why we keep coming back to the family of faith, to the Spirit of God, and say, Lord, help me to love well. That's why God and Jesus took so much time saying this is what you need to do, because they knew it was going to be hard. That's why he says love is patient. Why? Because there are people that are going to require patience. There are going to be people that work your nerves. Love is kind. Why? Because your natural proclivity is to be mean to them and not kind. So you got to practice love. So God knows that this kind of love is required when you're dealing with people. And this kind of love is what's required when he deals with us. That's why we stay faithful, because he's kind to us when he could be mean. He's patient with us when he could not be patient at all. And because of his love towards us, that shapes and frames our love towards our brothers and sisters, even those that are difficult to love.
Yeah. And John knows that as well as anybody, because he is difficult to love. And we have been patient with you, man. But one more thing,
we have been patient.
I'm going to throw punch your ass, though, next time you say that thing. I swear I'll reach right through the camera. But a friend of mine who's a brilliant theologian at one point said that one of his issues with sort of the modern incarnation of Christianity is how much we have decided that Christianity is all about worshiping Jesus. We don't really care about following him. And actually, you'll never see Jesus in Scripture say that he wants us to worship him. He calls us to follow him. He calls us to lay our lives down and to take up our crosses and do it. But I was on a comment thread. The post is not really important, but it was in response to the shooting that happened in Uvalde, and this guy had said something about, well, even Jesus encouraged his disciples to arm themselves. And I said, okay, if you only read half that scripture, that's exactly right. Read the next verse, bro. And so we got into a discussion about misquoting scripture. But then I said, if you really want to know what Jesus' response is to violence, just look at what Jesus said and Jesus actually did. Go to the Gospels and find me a place where he's violent, advocates for violence. You don't see it because he was not. And this guy said to me, and this is a guy I know who's a pastor, he says, why is it always about what Jesus said and did? And I very nearly shat myself. I didn't know how to respond in any way that wasn't going to sound snarky. Like, you're joking, right? Were you just kidding? But he just actually emphasized for me what the issue is that we have decided, and here's my issue with this, and maybe we can talk about this in terms of what we're doing with racial reconciliation, but you can worship Jesus and still be a trashy human. Yeah. Right? You can go to church, you can play the part, you can worship and do those things, and then you can just be a total asshat in the rest of your life and not allow that to be transformational.
Yeah. And that's why Satan isn't threatened by your church attendance.
Nah.
He's like, go to church every Sunday. Let tears run down your eye. As long as you still gonna roll your eye at your neighbor, I'm good with that. But Jesus says in Matthew 25, he said the first question he's gonna ask us before we even get on the other side of the gate, one of the moments is going to be this moment of judgment, and he's going to ask us, and he's not going to say, what was your favorite worship song? He's not going to say, give me the highlights of the sermons for the last 10 years. He's going to say, what did you do with the poor? What did you do with the marginalized? What did you do with the naked? And the idea there isn't some list. It's the idea of what did you do with people that were other than you?
Yeah.
How did you treat people that culture in the world system and structure, they were considered the least of these, those most likely oppressed or marginalized? What did you do with them? Y'all, that's his first question, because to him, he's saying the way people knew you was by your love. That's how you're going to know my Christians. You're going to know my disciples by their love. And I think we're known for a whole lot of stuff right now, and it's not our love.
Yeah, and it's really too bad, because I think you could probably echo this sentiment. I know a lot of really good, faithful Christians. And I know people who would not call themselves Christians. I know people who love well. They are also some of the most humble people you'll ever meet in your life.
Yeah.
They don't brag about it. They don't talk about it. So the ones that get the most attention are the ones who are making a show of whatever they're doing. And now it looks to all the world like Christianity is all about the mega church and the glitz and the whatever prosperity gospel guys. But what that does, I think, too, in some sense, is it normalizes, like we said earlier, it normalizes that experience, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not sure what your take on this would be, but I see young preachers, especially people that I know, falling into this trap of seeking Christian celebrity, which is almost always in a very white evangelical sort of framework, right? Even if they're black kids, I see them pulled into this structure that says, hey, this is how you get a platform. This is how you get followers. This is how you get this. And that to me seems like as big a trap as any. Don't you? Would you agree?
Yeah. I think it's so many traps set up. And I think with the whole celebrity thing, I mean, to be honest, it goes both ways. Sometimes people make you a celebrity and that's not even what you're trying to be. Because you are impactful or significant, then it just happens to you. And then some people are trying their best to build a platform and to build likes, and they're posting stuff based off of what they think is going to go viral and all that. I think we're all chasing the wind. God says, when you chase anything other than me, and when you make it about anything else other than me, you are setting yourself up for a trap. So I 100% agree with you. I think celebrity stuff is a trap. But I think it's one of many traps set out there to get us to be like this guy you're arguing with in the comments. Why does it always have to be about Jesus? if he can normalize that concept and that construct in our mind, Satan is one. Bro.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm actually still thinking about that comment. It took me a while. I'm like, really? But come on, man. So when we do speak in terms then of reconciliation, I know it's a process. I know it's, whatever it's going to be long and arduous, and it's going to have to be intentional. What is the church's role, if any, in pushing that agenda forward? Or should we just get the hell out of the way and let people do the work?
I think all the above. I think we lead with love. I feel like we create spaces in places where people get to belong, even if they don't believe. They get to be a part of a community, and we get to then facilitate the grace of God in their life, the love of God in their life, the generosity of God in their life, the hope of God in their life. Bro, we are literally here to love on people and point them to the hope and the love that we found in Jesus. I'm like the one writer said, I am just one beggar showing another beggar where I found bread. And if we do that well, I think we do that, and we'll see people coming together that have no business being together. We'll see white folks coming together with Latino folks, with Black folks, with Asian folks, coming together with indigenous folks, with immigrants. And we'll all be coming together as rich people, poor people, middle class, at a table that's not centered on whiteness, that's not centered on America, that's not centered on a nationalism, but that's centered on the blood of Jesus Christ. And it is in that kind of redemptive, beloved community where racial reconciliation begins to take place.
Wow. Well said, sir. Well said.
One thing that I've learned, though, and this is directed at our white listeners more, yes, we have a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
But and I've said this before on the podcast, I'll say it again, you cannot expect your siblings of color to be your professor.
Yeah.
In this.
No, that's great, John. That's great.
And part of the problem is we get caught in this trap, and I have to admit I've done it, where you go to your one Black friend and you say, hey, I said this. Was this out of line? Or can I do this? Or am I allowed to say this? Am I allowed to do this? They're not there to be our Google search.
Yeah.
And sometimes they are just absolutely not going to want to help you. And you have to be okay with that, because we have set up a system that the level of distrust towards us is warranted. And so you're going to get some times where they're like, I'm not going there with you. Go do your work. This isn't my job. And we seem to get super offended by that. And like, see, I'm trying to be a better person and they don't want to help me be a better person. Like it's somehow every person of color's job to pull us along with you.
Yeah, that's good, John.
That's gotta be just absolutely exhausting.
Yeah, absolutely exhausting. Bro, John and Nate, man, y'all are some of the most conscious, bearded white dudes I've ever seen in my life.
Man, it's the beards, really.
Like, I see these beards, I'm like, oh boy, here we go. And then
I just came back from a Duck Dynasty convention.
Yeah. And then, bro, y'all are dropping hot fire knowledge up in here, bro. This is crazy. This is so good. John, I said, because the awareness of that is so profound. And you've had to sit and learn that. So I can just tell you've had to sit and you've learned and you've listened And maybe it's just so rare to see, but bro, that's so good.
Well, what it is first of all, it's a painful journey, right? It's a lot of me being embarrassed and saying stupid things, trying to do something right, and then being called out luckily by some people who are willing to say that to me, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, dude, you're effing up here. I'll give an example, and I'm not going to name any names, but I came out on Facebook and made this crazy post about some crazy racist thing that was happening. I can't even tell you what it was. And okay, so here's me being the stupid white guy. And I have to be honest and say I did it on, I think I did it on purpose. I posted this right before I went to bed, so I didn't have to deal with all the BS, right?
Yeah.
And so I wake up to fire, just hate, right?
Wow.
And then somewhere in the middle of this, because I decide I need to read it all, somewhere in the middle of this is one of my Facebook friends who's a person of color calling me out. It's like, what the F are you doing here? You have been silent through all of this. You have not said a word. You are not helping.
Wow.
At all. And I'm like, there's two ways I can respond to this, right? One is to say, F you, I'm doing the best I can. Or I can say, no, you're right. I did this on purpose. I set it up this way on purpose. So I didn't have to deal with the hate. And all I did was create a situation that triggers people of color.
Wow.
Because they now have to see all of this. They're friends of mine on Facebook. They see all this hate directed at them, and I'm not defending it one bit.
Wow.
And that was a huge wake-up call for me. It's like, if I'm not willing to defend it and call every single one of these people out, then what the hell am I doing? Why am I even doing this? Why am I even here?
Wow.
So it was a huge wake-up call. And I was like, we just have to be better. We just have to be better.
Well, and I can say from what I know of my brother, is in the last couple of years, especially, he's been very intentional about what he's reading.
Yeah.
So we're talking to folks going, okay, I'm reading this book now. What's next? What should I read? Who should I read next? So his reading list is extensive and is eclectic as all hell.
Bro,
which is good.
I appreciate that. I really appreciate that.
But I think that's one of those things that when we start talking about what role we can play in racial reconciliation, whatever that looks like going forward, dear white friends who are listening to the podcast, one of the best things we can do is we can listen, and we can educate ourselves, and we can actually, read some books that are outside of our experience, and start to understand that, there are things when you spoke about, interactions with police, and not all police are bad. That's the knee-jerk response I get anytime I call out anything like that or say anything about. But I immediately thought about my son when he was 7 years old, who was attacked by a pit bull and had to be hauled to the hospital and have his face stitched up. And for the next several years, my son hated every dog. I shouldn't say hated, but he was afraid because of his experience, right? And not all dogs are bad, but that breed of dog in particular earned a reputation with him that they weren't going to get his trust immediately, right? That was going to have to be earned. And so when I think of that, I think about, that, like you said, this narrative that comes to you from your grandfather and from your father and your own experience growing up and what you've even had to educate your own children on. Yeah, that trust is not given automatically based on, years and years and years of experience, right?
Well, and I think what the police officers in this country need to realize, it's also not deserved. Just because they wear a uniform and they have said some oath, they don't deserve trust. They don't. They also have to earn it.
Yeah.
They have to show through their actions that they are willing to be a different type of police officer than what specifically people of color have come to expect from police officers. So they feel like as soon as they put that uniform on, and I'm sorry for calling out police like this, but I think it's something that needs to be addressed. They don't automatically deserve respect. I don't automatically deserve respect just because of whatever experience I have in doing something. I have to earn that. When I go in and say I have expertise in something and I go into a new field, I don't I don't automatically deserve that respect. I have to show the work. I have to do the job. I have to show them that I am worthy of their respect.
Yeah. And I would say, I agree with that, John, but I would also say maybe it shouldn't be that way. Maybe you should be able to start off fresh with trust. Here's the problem. We've got decades of receipts of abuse. So exactly. knowing that we've got decades of receipts of abuse, you should immediately come in knowing that there's a deficit of trust built in with me, rightfully so. So you come in knowing because of the abuse. And so number one, Nat, that's terrible what happened to your son. But if I'm a friend of your family and I know I own a pit bull and I'm coming over to the house and I'm bringing my dog, I know that deficit is there. That shows up, number one, if I even bring the pit bull, if I do, how I bring it, the intentional conversations that we have.
Exactly.
I don't walk in the house and say, all right, take the pit bull off the leash and let it run around. That would be so unloving and so uncaring. And, Nat, I can't tell how tall you are, but you'd probably try to whoop my behind. Like
it wouldn't matter how tall I was or you were. I would absolutely. You want to hear a funny story about this? I'm going to tell you anyway. So I had a neighbor once upon a time. We live next door to a house that's become a rental in the last 10 years. So people come and go pretty quickly. So there was this guy that was hanging around, looked for all the world like he'd been in prison, pretty rough dude, lots of prison-esque looking tats, and always shirtless in the front yard working on his car and that kind of stuff. So, but at that point in time, we had about a 4-foot fence between our properties, chain link. And this guy had a pit bull that was huge. Pit bulls are usually short. This thing it could just about step over the fence. This dog was that big. He just jumped over. So he would routinely be in my yard. My son at this point was maybe 8. So it's about a year and a half or so after he'd been bitten. He goes out to play in his yard, which is where he got attacked, which was our backyard. And he was shaking at the window, won't go out in his own backyard to play because that dog is at the fence or is in the yard. And I'm hot, dude. I'm hot. And so I go over to this dude's house and I bang on the door like an asshole. And I say, I don't give a hell. I don't care who you are. If I see your dog in my yard one more time, I'm going to put a bullet in him first. And then I'm going to ask questions later. And I explained to him my story. So my son's been attacked by a pit bull. He's deathly afraid. He should not have to be afraid to go in his own backyard to play. Keep that thing on a chain or get it out of here. So that's not the funny part. The funny part was everything I thought about this guy was true. And about a week later, the cop showed up at my house telling me that he's a member of a prison gang called the Texas Syndicate, that he's wanted for charges of murder and arson. Let's get back to how tall I am. I'm 5'10" on a good day. Blowed up this guy like he was man. And to his credit, I don't know what kind of person this guy is but he was like, man, I totally understand. That's not my dog. It's my son's. You do what you got to do to protect your family. I totally get it. But what the hell was I thinking, man?
Wow.
But they wanted me to, they actually had come to my house and said, hey, if he shows up, give us a call. And I said, no. He's wanted for arson. And he lives next door to me. No, not calling you. Right. You do your own job. He's been out here every day this week, shirtless, working on his truck, and you need me to find him for you.
Right. He's sitting right there. I'm not going to bitch.
Tell you what. No. So there is that. But there is that tendency, and I like to imagine sometimes that if I was, maybe at one point in my life when I was a kid, I wanted to be a police officer. I think it's a respectable profession. I think we need police officers. I know there are anarchists among us who think we can self-govern. I'm sorry. I've seen too many humans to think that that's totally true.
Hey, give me police all day. I want police. I'm not, yeah.
But I will never understand the attitude of a lot of police officers, enough of them that it matters, that immediately start an encounter like they did with you. Suspicious, confrontational. And they've been trying to train police officers how to de-escalate situations, and he immediately comes out and escalates everything to a confrontation with you. And I'll never understand. I would like to think that we can rebuild the trust between police officers and the citizens that they serve, by the way.
Exactly.
By dispensing with that, right? And the idea somehow that one of the things that irks me is to see the Blue Lives Matter thing, because I don't think there's any such thing. You can take the uniform off tomorrow, sir. If this job is too much for you, if it's required, if it's just too dangerous, and you don't have to be this anymore. My black friends don't get to take off their blackness and decide to not be that anymore. Yeah. So let's not equivocate, right? Let's not let's let those false parallels aren't real.
Yeah, and like you said, and I want to, because we've talked about it so much, I want to make sure that we are crystal clear. I believe in police. I have family members that are police officers. I think we can reimagine policing.
Absolutely.
Especially when we've seen so much tragedy and so much poor policing, and we've got the receipts of how it goes bad. I think it is worthy of reevaluation and a little bit more reimagination to see how we can serve and protect all of our citizens well. Yeah. And I'm thankful for the police officers that do that every single day.
Yeah. And one of the unfortunate, this happens so often. The whole defund the police thing was such a mischaracterization of if they named it that, then they're dumb. I know what they really meant was, let's look at our resources, our allocation of resources. Because one thing I'll say in the defense of police is they're asked to do too much.
Absolutely. And they'll agree. They'll say, I shouldn't be on this call.
Yes, I don't have the training. Yeah. This is why we end up with people who are in mental health crises getting shot because they sent a cop to do a doctor's job. Yeah. Yeah. They don't have enough mental health professionals. They don't have enough training in this area to diagnose or to at least assess a situation and say, this guy's not threatening for no reason. He's having a psychotic break. Let's deal with him differently than, or for that matter, somebody who's, in the middle of a, full blown some sort of drug issue. But so I will defend police officers and say, I think we've expected too much of them.
Absolutely. And most officers that I've engaged with agree with that 100%. There's no pushback on that at all. They feel like we have overused, and how we use police could totally be reimagined so that it leverages their actual expertise and doesn't put them in compromising situations where these tragedies kind of happen.
Yeah. And even in my small town, I own a business and I employ a couple people who are on the spectrum. And we partner with a mental health facility here, and we're working with people who are trying to find job placement, and we've done our best to provide some opportunities for folks that are high functioning and can do some things. But we had one lady working for us, and she straight out had a break in the middle of her shift one day. And so we called her caseworker, and what they ended up doing was sending the police. So this person who has a history with policing, who is having a mental health issue, they sent cops to arrest her and take her away. I was like, that's the best you could do for this lady? I mean, anyway. So, but that to me highlighted, if that's happening in my small town in West Texas, how much more so is this happening in heavily populated areas, in large cities?
Absolutely. So, yeah. No, we've got some work to do.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that the discussions that we're having around race and around those kinds of things are important for us to have. So I appreciate you being willing to do that. The book again is How We Love Matters.
How We Love Matters. Bookstore near you, Amazon, order today. Yeah. I think it'll really encourage you.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. John gives it his one thumb up, seal of approval. He just got over COVID. So that's obviously that. Are you working on a follow up book? I mean, everybody I know who's written a book is already working on their next one. So
I am indeed. I'm actually working on a devotional for How We Love Matters. So you can cool. Devotionally. So that should be coming out in the fall.
That's amazing. Cool. Good deal.
Yeah.
Well, we appreciate you, man. I can talk to you for a good long time, man. I hate to even say goodbye, but we have appreciated the conversation, man.
Yeah, for sure.
You guys have been amazing. The Bearded Brothers can have me back anytime. I love it.
All right, John. Renaming the podcast. No, we don't have to do that, do we?
No.
This is not church. AKA Bearded White Guys.
If we rename it that, then I have to keep it forever. I'm not sure how much longer I can do this, but we'll see.
On Albert Tate episodes, when I come on, we'll make it a bearded podcast episode.
There you go. I like it. All right, bro. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to This Is Not Church. Be sure to rate and review the podcast on your platform of choice. If you would like to partner with us, visit patreon.com/thisisnotchurch, where you will receive exclusive content such as early access to episodes, videos of upcoming episodes, and live Q&A sessions. Be sure to check out our Facebook group or follow us on Twitter and Instagram. All the links are in the show notes. We'll be back soon with another episode.